Hello there, welcome to the Media Binge. My name is Austin, and this video is my final piece of Media Binge reporting for the year 2024. Because in this video, I'm going to be talking through my favorite first-time feature film watches of 2024. Now, I am going to start with the new stuff, the 2024 releases, but taking a quick glance at my Letterboxd, I see that of the 200-ish movies I watched last year, only about 10% were actually 2024 releases proper. So deeper into this video, what I'm looking to do is talk about the great discoveries that I had this year, regardless of year of release, director, genre, whatever. These are the primo 5-star discoveries that I made in 2024 that I am so excited to talk about and share with you guys. So I hope you guys will bear with me through all of that. And at the end of this, I am also looking to talk a little about my plans with the channel moving into 2025. But all of that in due course, let's get started with my top 5 favorite films of 2024 as of this recording, because there's quite a bit I still need to catch up on. But I feel pretty strong about these 5 recommendations at least. So we'll get started with number 5, which has got to be Edward Berger's Conclave. Here we have a PG-rated drama for adults. I mean, how many of those do we get these days? But essentially the film is about the great men of the Catholic Church, the cardinals, coming together to attempt to elect a new pope. And within that, there's a lot of room for melodrama. I saw the term airport paperback thrown at this movie as a positive and a negative, and I don't necessarily disagree with that because this thing does get a bit pulpy, but I think that a strong script and a stellar cast, including John Lithgow, Ray Fiennes, Stanley Tucci, I think all of that elevates the material. It's also a fantastic looking film that totally steps up to the challenge of representing the majesty and pageantry of the Catholic Church. So all around, just a great time at the movies, a thrilling watch, easy to recommend this one. My 4th favorite film of 2024 has got to be The Substance. Dude, The Substance. You see that shit? What the fuck? This movie gets pretty nutty, especially in its final 15 minutes or so. Some strong body horror elements to this. So a bit of a warning there, I love that shit, but I get that it's not for everybody. At least in this case, it's in service of a pretty strong metaphor throughout the film. This is an overt critique of Hollywood and modern beauty standards. And the film is about an aging Hollywood actress played by Demi Moore, who is really on the outs, really seeing the last twinkle of her star fade, but then she comes in contact with this service called The Substance, which allows her to essentially grow and birth a new self. And this new self is younger, faster, stronger, hotter, everything that she is so desperate to be. And along with this, there come some rules, like only one self can be active at any given time, and some tensions develop out of that. But the movie does a really good job of outlining those and then playing with it. It takes some really fun turns, especially in the middle there. And I thought that there was a lot of depth to what Demi Moore was doing in portraying the quiet terror of aging and how frustrating it can be that at a certain point, no matter how hard you try, you can no longer achieve a state of being that was once yours so effortlessly. The film also does this cool stylistic thing, especially in the scenes with Dennis Quaid, where it does these extreme ugly close-ups. Remember in SpongeBob when they used to do that? They'd cut in and be hyper detailed. That's what they're doing here. And I enjoyed what that did for the individual scenes, but I also liked how it played with the themes of the movie, where it's well, everything's hideous under a microscope. Elizabeth, just chill out. You look fine for 50. A great ride, this movie. I think it rocks. That last 15 minutes is totally nutty. Not the craziest thing I've ever seen, but up there. Recommended if you can handle some pretty strong body horror. My 3rd favorite film of 2024 is another female-directed horror feature. This is going to be Arkasha Stevenson's The First Omen, which is, of course, a prequel to Richard Donner's classic, The Omen. But I ask that you don't hold that against this film because I hate prequels. I think that is a losing start. This is an exception. And especially you look at that original Omen film, they're not trying to hide that the kid is the Antichrist. Like, this is the son of the devil, and that is where the tension comes from. So, having an awareness of where this story eventually leads, I think actually enhances the experience. Plus, while this is not reinventing the horror genre, I think that this film is operating within it to the highest degree. It is a very eerie film. It gets under your skin. A slight element of body horror here as well. It's also superbly well directed and maybe the best looking movie of anything I've seen in 2024. So the craft is exceptional. I mean, just the fact that they were able to do a scene that is a pretty direct homage to the most famous scene from Possession, where her like orifices are weeping. The fact that they were able to pull that off and that it worked, I think speaks to the strength of this movie. Just an all-around super creepy, disturbing horror feature that I would strongly recommend. Even if horror is not like your favorite thing, this is one to make an exception for. My second favorite film of 2024 is Dune. Dune 2. Who'd have thought? I mean, coming out of Villeneuve's first Dune movie, I really didn't care for it, but I recognize now that's because I got half the story. Now that I have both parts, the whole scope of it is clear to me. I can recognize this as a colossal cinematic achievement. Like, if we're just talking about the magic of the movies, this is about as good as it gets in 2024 because the technical craft is just astonishing. And the scale of this thing makes it an achievement on the level of like a Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy, where you sit back and you're like, oh my goodness, just the amount of coordination to pull this off. Humans are dope. It's also cool to see a movie this popular that is so weird and singular and has so many ideas that it's engaging with, where it's sort of deconstructing the idea of the chosen one. Star Wars, this is not, and I appreciate it for that. I mean, I don't like love what Chalamet or Zendaya are doing in this movie. They're fine, but deeper into the bench, like Austin Butler, Stellan Skarsgård, Léa Seydoux, they're doing some pretty interesting stuff, so enough to sustain me. But really, it's just the technical craft. Like, the visual effects are fantastic. The sound design is even better. Hans Zimmer's score is the best thing he's done in years. This was just a great cinematic experience, and I'm excited to be able to live with this like 5-hour epic that is Dune Part 1 and Part 2 together. I mean, it was one of the most popular films of the year. Y'all have probably seen it if you're interested at all, but it's Austin approved as well. And my number one favorite film of 2024, I'm almost nervous to say it because this is a film that I recommended pretty strongly to some people in my personal life, and multiple of them came back to me later and were like, Austin, I hated that. And that's never a good feeling. But accounting for my own experience, I didn't have a better time with any movie out of 2024 than M. Night Shyamalan's Trap. This is a film about a serial killer, a man that we know is a serial killer, who is attending a midday pop concert with his young daughter. And shortly into this experience, he realizes that the authorities have surrounded the arena. They're closing in on him. The whole thing's been orchestrated to trap him, because they don't know what he looks like, they don't know who he is, but they know that he is in attendance at this event. And this is where they're going to get him. And then the movie becomes a series of increasingly preposterous circumstance where Josh Hartnett, who in my opinion gives the performance of the year, is outwitting these authorities and sort of manipulating people and expressing his creativity, using that psychopathic mind to evade. This dude is a supervillain. Like, I do understand that there are some contrivances to this story, but in my experience, those almost always made for a more exciting movie. I also think that a fair bit of the appeal of this movie to me is in an appreciation for what Shyamalan is doing as a writer-director of original films. It is so cool to see someone at his talent level, because M. Night Shyamalan is an extremely good director. It is so cool to see him this unrestricted, truly making the movies that he wants to make. And I think that the joy of that experience, the exuberance of it, actually does translate to the finished product, where you can almost see M. Night behind his typewriter, like cackling with glee as he just comes up with some crazy way for the butcher to get out of this seemingly impossible circumstance. Like, yeah, you could also argue that there's a little bit of vanity in him casting his own daughter in a major role with this film, but I thought she was good. And the indulgence of this film, I actually see as more a feature than a bug. So again, this movie, I've had to accept that not everyone loves it the way that I do, but if what I've described sounds interesting, at least, then I highly recommend you check it out. And I hope that in its own time, this movie will find more fans, because I had an amazing time with Trap. So there you have my top 5 favorite releases of 2024, but now let's get to the discoveries, the stuff released in previous years that I only just came to and am so excited to talk about and share with you guys. I mean, these are going to be some real primo, like 5-star recommendations, so hope y'all are down for that. If you want to skip around, that's totally cool. There should be time codes in the video description for this, but I'm going to get things started with my favorite movie of any kind that I watched in 2024, and that's Phil Tippett's Mad God. Got the Blu-ray on that one, which obviously I'm hoping to pick up discs for most of the films that I'm going to be talking about in this video, all bangers, but this is one that was like automatic. As soon as I finished this movie, I needed to get me a copy because I knew that I would be revisiting this thing pretty regularly. It is a film that feels made for me. And within that, I do think it is a tremendous work, but I do have to acknowledge that it's really just talking my language. This is a stop-motion horror film with some pretty graphic elements, but I do think that stop motion is the perfect medium to tell this story, as much as there is a story to this. How to nail that down? In essence, this movie is about a humanoid figure transporting a suitcase through this totally nightmarish world full of all of these horrific creatures. And within that, the stop motion is very good. The creature design and the scene design is even better. Because we're talking about Phil Tippett, that's the director of this film, and he has a history with
industrial light and magic.
Do you remember the Rancor from Return of the Jedi? That's Phil Tippett. That's who we're talking about here. A lot of sections of the movie end up zooming in on some little gross minion and the tasks that he must perform. And while this movie is pretty much wordless, I think that is to its benefit. I think that it is very easy to like I've had a job. I don't know why he's extracting the goo from that thing and then moving it over to this other spot. And I don't know why this other monster's mad at him about it. But there are kind of themes of like industry, and throughout the whole course of this movie, it paints such a fantastic picture of this like nightmare world, which I do feel is a reflection of our own world. Like, while there is no overt explanation for why any of these individual like cogs in the machine still must keep functioning, the way that this world is shown to have like no regard for life or no reverence for that at all, and how a lot of these processes just involve just like throwing bodies, in some cases literally throwing bodies at a problem to keep the machine going. You get it. But I just enjoyed the craft more than anything else. The creature design, this movie's pretty gross. Again, to me, that is a plus, not a minus. It's also an 83-minute movie, so not a big time commitment on that, and I love to see that. I think that's about as much as you were going to get out of this setup. Had an absolute blast with this. Highly, highly, highly recommended if this sounds at all interesting to any of you. Next, I want to shout out Fritz Lang's Dr. Mabuse the Gambler. It's a 1922 4-hour silent movie, and it's freaking awesome. It's about a supervillain, and it's very easy to trace what's going on in this movie all the way up to something like The Dark Knight, with the Joker character in that. He's like this master manipulator with this vast network. He's everywhere at once. That's what Mabuse is. He has these borderline superhuman like hypnosis powers. He's a genius manipulator, and he also has a vast network of minions that do his bidding. This movie, it's 4 hours long. I know that can be kind of intimidating, but it is typically presented in 2 parts, so you can do half of it in one sitting and then half in another very easily. In fact, I'd encourage you to do so. The lead performance is fantastic, and the filmmaking, like with respect to the limitations of the era, is totally top notch. I mean, nobody did it better than Fritz Lang. Also, the Kino Lorber disc has a really, really cool score. So if you can see it that way, I think that's the way to do it. Fast forwarding about 50 years, I caught up with Ingmar Bergman's Scenes from a Marriage, which has been well discussed at this point. I don't know if I have that much more to add other than my personal stamp of approval, but this thing is really just tremendous. It gets to the heart of a lot of issues that still couples are dealing with to this very day. Ingmar Bergman, one of the best to ever do it. Like, I really came out of this thing like, man, what am I even doing watching other movies when there are Bergman films I haven't seen yet? His collaboration with Liv Ullmann alone is one of the greatest actor-director collaborations of all time. So if you like drama, if you like European drama about relationships and stuff, it doesn't get much better than Scenes from a Marriage. Would recommend going for the TV version over the theatrical. I was similarly impacted by William Wyler's The Best Years of Our Lives, which is a film about returning World War II veterans and the issues that they're dealing with, the baggage that comes out of that war, which, considering that this movie was released and won Best Picture out of 1946, it is incredible the amount of insight and perspective that this film has on those circumstances. So the film follows a variety of characters. It's a really well-made studio picture with strong production value and great performances throughout, but I was particularly moved by a character portrayed by Harold Russell, who has lost his hands in the war. This is an actor who didn't work much outside of this film because he actually didn't have hands, so kind of limited in the roles he could take on, but he brings a lot of truth to this scenario, and they just let the power of that scenario speak for itself. Legitimately one of the best films from this era I've ever seen, so gotta check out The Best Years of Our Lives. Another studio soldier picture, this time from the 1950s, I loved David Lean's The Bridge on the River Kwai. David Lean knew exactly what he was doing shooting movies for the big screen. And this is one that I would recommend catching on the biggest screen that you possibly can for that very fact. It is a film about a group of Allied soldiers in a Japanese prisoner of war camp who are tasked with building a bridge on the River Kwai. And some characters feel different sorts of ways about that, about how they should approach this task, and a lot of delightful drama comes out of that. This gave me a bit more perspective on Alec Guinness, who is tremendous in this film. It was great to see him here, having only really been familiar with him in Star Wars and Lady Killers. The magic of movies on full display with this one. Catch it in rep if you can. I'm disgusted with myself that it took so long for me to see it. Can't think of a transition between these two to save my life, but the Wachowskis' Bound, their first movie, is one of the sexiest films I've ever seen. This is a lesbian, erotic crime thriller. This is the film that the Wachowskis made to prove essentially that they could make The Matrix, and from my experience, this is almost just as good. They have quite the vision with the camera language here. The camera setups are really inventive and exciting and keep the tension up. The performances are also quite good, and I just found the experience of the whole thing very stirring in more ways than one. Recently released on Criterion as well, so I gotta get that disc. I do already have a Criterion Blu-ray of David Cronenberg's The Brood, but I can't show it to you because I lent it to my brother. Very excited for him to check that out. Regardless, this is the film that I saw from David Cronenberg that finally pushed me over the edge to accept him as one of my top 5 favorite directors of all time. His classic body horror elements are certainly here. They are really well done, and that just does a lot for me on a visceral level. But I feel the way those are deployed in this film does really enhance and sort of elevate the themes of the film. This is a movie that starts out as like maybe an evil kid movie, a la Children of the Corn, but ultimately Cronenberg is able to elevate it out of that space by this film's climax. Oliver Reed has a notable role in this film, which between this and another movie I'll talk about soon, I've really come to appreciate what he brings to a film, like his relentless intensity. But yeah, The Brood, I feel it is one of Cronenberg's best, which is to say it's one of the best's bests. So Absolutely check it out if you haven't seen it and you like body horror. Talking a lot of body horror today. Heading back to the 1940s for this next film, Children of Paradise, directed by Michael Carne, which, who is this director? Like, he made this profound, just incredible masterpiece, and then he has all these other films that I've never heard of. Like, there have to be gems in that filmography if he was capable of making Children of Paradise. But anyway, the film actually takes place in 1830s Paris, which I'm led to believe was a very exciting, bustling time. And it centers around a beautiful woman played by the great Arletty and four men that are after her hand. They want to get with her for different reasons. You have a mime, a traditional actor, a gangster, and like a bureaucrat. So a lot of different angles there, and the movie ends up being about like life and art and love and a dozen other things in a very profound way. I watched this film because Ethan Hawke emphatically recommended it in his Criterion Closet video. He told me that after watching, I would want to go walk around in the park and think about life for a few hours, and he was 100% right about that. So thanks for the recommendation, Mr. Hawke. Dad. I believe I've mentioned a few times on this channel that I don't really, in general, care for musicals. They're just not my thing. More often than not, when a character breaks into song, it just like shatters any element of immersion for me. But this was not the case with Fiddler on the Roof, which is a musical that my girlfriend, who is Jewish, had been insisting we watch for over a year. And I have to thank her, shout her out, for being 100% right in this particular instance. The music in this film is tremendous, so memorable, so moving, and I do feel that genuinely in most of the scenes where it appears, it enhances the emotion of the scene. The movie is about a community of Jewish peasants in pre-revolution Russia, and it's just filled with very memorable characters. Topol, in particular, as the lead performance, even with all of his like fourth wall breaking, is just so charismatic, so fun to spend time with. I did not feel the runtime on this at all, and highly recommend that anyone who has somehow missed Fiddler on the Roof, like me, up till this point, give it a go. It's one of the best. Oh boy, this is a marathon. A lot of movies to talk about here. But in 2024, I also watched and loved Gore Verbinski's first film, Mousehunt. Did not expect to love this as much as I did, although maybe I should have had some expectations there where Gore Verbinski directed my favorite film of all time. Nobody makes action sequences that cut together as well as Verbinski, and I just assume that he does the craziest amount of storyboards because I don't know how you achieve that any other way. This is a movie about two very dumb brothers who are attempting to restore a great manor, a home that they've inherited from their deceased father, but there is a weirdly intelligent mouse that lives in this house who aims to thwart them every step of the way. And there's a lot of slapstick nonsense in this that is very funny and very exciting and very visceral is what I'm getting at. Had a great time with Mousehunt. Well, actually do have a Blu-ray copy of this next one, George Miller's 3,000 Years of Longing, which was his follow-up to Fury Road, and a bit of a redemption watch for me as someone who didn't totally love what was going on with Furiosa, but that's beside the point. 3,000 Years of Longing is a djinn movie, a genie film, where Idris Elba plays that mystical creature opposite the one and only Tilda Swinton. Really all I should have to say is those two names to get you to watch a movie, but I'll continue with the basic setup. Tilda Swinton is a academic type. She happens upon the lamp. She takes it back to her hotel room. She rubs the lamp. The genie comes out and they have a profound conversation. That might sound a little bit boring. You know, you're stuck two people talking in a hotel room, but Miller keeps it interesting. I don't think he can help himself there. And there are plenty of flashbacks to the fantastic life that this genie has lived over millennia. Pretty exciting. And again, I found the actual conversation very moving, and then all of that flashback stuff just really fantastical, just transportative. I'd highly recommend this one to anybody who enjoys a fantasy element to their films or are invested in like the grand tradition of storytelling, which is something that this movie engages with in a pretty cool way. I'm also recommending Celine Sciamma's Petite Maman, which is her follow-up to the fantastic Portrait of a Lady on Fire. This movie's almost as good as that one, although a lot less steamy because it is about a child who ventures into the wood and meets a version of her mother who is the same age as her. So there's kind of like a Back to the Future thing going on, but younger. In general, I don't love movies about children because I find kids annoying, and also I don't feel that most films about children reflect my lived experience of being a child, but this is a notable exception. The child performances are excellent, and I love that they don't like fixate on the magical element. Like that's something that kids can do. They accept things. So as soon as that is established, then the movie can carry on and be about what it's going to be about, which is like the joys of childhood and mother-daughter relationships and a couple other things. Just a fantastic movie overall, and I'd recommend it to anyone who enjoys things with just like a tinge of magic involved, something that's a little artsy, but not like in the deep end. Like there is a very clear story that you can follow through this thing. And it's honestly it's just delightful. Less delightful, but no less excellent, is Jonathan Glazer's Birth, which Jonathan Glazer is a filmmaker who comes out with something every 5 to 10 years, and I think at this point I have learned to just pay attention whenever he blesses us with a new film. This thing has an incredible setup that it executes on with superb precision. That setup is that Nicole Kidman plays a beautiful, successful city widow whose husband had died 10 years prior, and on the verge of marrying her new boyfriend, she's visited by a 10-year-old boy who comes to her and says, "I am the reincarnated form of your husband. Do not marry this new guy." And like, what do you do at that point? Because this movie then does like sit this kid down and like put him through it, and it keeps you in that gray area throughout. You're like, is this real? Is it not? And it creates a lot of space for drama where you imagine any opportunity to get back somebody that you loved and have lost. And now there's huge incentive for you to believe this kid. Super well directed movie, also a strong child performance in this one. It's a movie that I would recommend to anyone who is a fan of really anything from Nicole Kidman's like Prestige era. Really great. I caught up with Yorgos Lanthimos' Poor Things, which is tremendous. As much as I love The Lobster, this is his best movie to date. He is doing the Tim Burton thing on a level that Tim Burton never could have even dreamed of. Although I do think Yorgos has his own flair to things, as exemplified by his other recent film, Kinds of Kindness, which that was cool. I enjoyed a lot of that, although not as much as Poor Things. Anyway, this movie, the production of it is astonishing. The visual sense, the score is really underrated in my opinion. This movie does sort of fall victim to the Born Sexy Yesterday thing, which can be kind of problematic, but I also think that this is a movie with tremendous heart that is very earnestly engaging with the human experience and how awful that can be and how wonderful that can be, especially highlighted through the eyes of somebody who is so new to it. This is a Frankenstein story, but it does have a fresh new take on it, I feel. And again, just the production, I can't deny it. Loved Mark Ruffalo in this thing. Just such a unself-conscious performance that he gives as this goof, this guy getting led around by his dick. The bit where he like eats it on the stairs is like the funniest thing I saw all year. Very weird movie, but I found it quite moving. I think everybody's pretty much done talking about Poor Things at this point, but I just caught up with it and I thought it was great. So there you go. And the final film that I would like to highlight in this video, my final great film discovery of 2024, is Ken Russell's The Devils, starring Oliver Reed, told you he'd be back, as the sexiest 17th century French Catholic priest to ever live. He is accused of witchcraft by a group of very sexually repressed nuns. After that happens, just all hell breaks loose, and the energy of this thing just stays up, up, up till the credits roll. It is a movie that gets pretty wacky. It has a lot of the same visual aesthetics that I love in the great works of Terry Gilliam, with like the wide angle and the weirdness. This is a movie I'd highly recommend to anyone who goes in for like that 70s brand of weirdness, especially the early 70s. Had a great time with the Devils. Regarding this film, and just in general. And that's it. Those are the best films that I saw for the first time in 2024, both new and old. Let me know in the comments what the best stuff you saw was. I'm always looking for recommendations, especially if you think I would dig it based on my tastes represented here. But before I actually wrap up, I did want to talk a little bit about the channel and my plans moving forward with the Media Binge in 2025. The first thing to address is that last year, at the beginning of 2024, I made a video very much like this one, where I was very ambitious, talking about how I wanted to get things fired up again, and I was going to be posting like twice a month, and obviously that did not happen. And I feel kind of bad about that. But here's the whole story. At the same time I was doing that, I also started a podcast with my good friend Bryce called Big Flying Lizards, where for the first while, we were talking about House of the Dragon, and then once season 2 of that wrapped up, we pivoted to talking about a dragon movie every week. That was a lot of fun, and there are a good 40 or so episodes of that over on the Big Flying Lizards channel that you can check out if you've been missing me. But at the end of 2024, I made the very tough decision to step away from that project so that I could focus on this. Because while that was a very fun endeavor, I ultimately didn't feel like I was fulfilling my need to talk about film and music in like a really in-depth way. I made the choice to step away from that. Bryce and I are still great friends, and I'm sure at some point in the future I will reappear on his podcast. I'm just not the every week co-host anymore. But I outline all of this just to show that I am actually taking steps to free myself up so that I can focus on this channel this year. I assure you guys, this is a legitimate passion for me. I have a million different videos that I want to make and have already started scripting out a couple different video essays. In the meantime, I'm looking to do some more casual videos, working through my vinyl and Blu-ray collections. So if you're interested in any of that, please follow along. I appreciate everyone who has stuck with me up to this point. And I guess that's going to do it for this video. So new videos on the way eventually, and I'll see you guys when those drop. Thanks for watching.